6 questions. 6 knives stuck in the truth. Buried under the perfect facade of a peaceful departure. But no passing is peaceful when the hand of the hidden person still lurks somewhere. Between the pieces that never fit. Between the last breaths that no one heard until the end. Gene Hackman is gone. But these 6 questions are still waiting to be answered. Chapter 1. Golden Boys discuss from the dazzling lights of red carpet premieres to post-Oscar parties that lasted until dawn. Gene Hackman once had all the privileges of an A-list star. A man who had twice held the prestigious golden statue. A rare man who rose to the top without compromising with any hidden forces. But behind this brilliant aura was Gene Hackman, who quietly closed the door. Rejected all the glamorous invitations of Hollywood. Rejected everything that people called glory. Since the late 1980s, when his career peaked with Mississippi Burning and Unforgiven, Gene Hackman began to distance himself from major events. Awards, titles, photos with colleagues over glasses of sparkling champagne became luxury items that Hackman was no longer interested in. Hollywood has no loyalty, no conscience, only an endless appetite for profit. This sharp statement was not just a hasty remark, but the culmination of what he had seen, experienced, absorbed into every cell during decades of wrestling between the spotlight and the calculations behind the scenes. Hackman wasn't born to be an idol. He honestly said he never felt comfortable walking up on stage to accept an award. The way hands patted him on the back, the fake smiles exchanged behind the velvet curtain, or the congratulatory handshakes followed by merciless stabbings to the back all made Hackman feel disgusted. There is an anecdote that Hackman once told a close friend that immediately after receiving his first Oscar for his role in The French Connection, he took off his bow tie and threw it straight into the trash can in the men's room of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion Theater. This dissatisfaction was not just caused by a few fleeting moments. It was the accumulation of decades since the day Hackman set foot in the industry with the simple dream of living out his passion for acting. He once said that I didn't come here for fame. I came here to work. But then he realized that Hollywood didn't exist to nurture passion. It existed only to swallow any soul that dared to dream too much of honesty or pure art. For a long time, Hackman became a thorn in the side of many hidden forces in Hollywood. He turned down lucrative contracts, refused to appear at lavish fundraising events, and even openly rejected invitations to join the Academy jury. For him, Hollywood was a giant trap where the weak were willing to sell each other out to survive a few more seasons. So Hackman chose an almost unprecedented path, severing all ties of power, closing his doors to the media, retreating to live in seclusion in New Mexico with his wife, Betsy Arakawa, the only woman in his life who had never betrayed his belief in goodness. But even as Hackman tried to sever all ties to the movie capital, Hollywood continued to lurk behind him. Calls from famous directors. Scripts sent to his door even though no one knew his exact address. All like ghosts clinging to Hackman's life, reminding him that no one had ever really escaped Hollywood's control. And the worst thing, the thing that smoldered and burned the room Hackman had tried to protect for decades, were the secrets he was forced to keep. Secrets about backstage parties. Secret deals between production tycoons and young stars ready to do anything to appear on the red carpet. Hackman knew and hated himself for remaining silent. So in his final days, when acute chest pains forced him to face the limits of life, Hackman broke the vow of silence he had taken for nearly half a century. And what he said was the first fragment of the horrific image of Hollywood he had witnessed. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Studio. Despite his experienced, cool demeanor on screen, Gene Hackman was a smoldering fire in real life, ready to explode whenever he came face to face with things that irritated his senses. And this fire, for the first time, burned brightest on the set of The French Connection, in 1971, when Hackman took on the role of Jimmy Popeye Doyle, the character that brought him fame. No one expected that behind this gritty, realistic framework lay a period of intense tension between the lead actor and the powerful crew. Director William Friedkin was there, but his style of work was a nightmare for those who didn't give up. Friedkin was known for his brutal direction, prone to pushing actors to the limits of their physical and mental limits in order to achieve realistic shots. But for Hackman, what he faced was not just the director's harshness, but the unseen force behind the cameras. From his first days on set, Hackman clearly felt that the eyes watching him weren't simply from the production team. There were private conversations, suggestive offers from several men he had never met. They didn't mention acting, scripts, or any artistic elements. Instead, they placed conditions in exchange for invisible support, something Hackman later called dirty deals behind the scenes. During a late-night shoot, with the entire crew exhausted, Hackman went backstage to get some air. In a dark corner behind the studio, where the street lamps cast a faint, illusory light, he suddenly heard a short conversation between the producer and the stranger. The whispers mixed with cigarette smoke, but it was enough for Hackman to understand that this role, his subsequent awards, even his career path, were all arranged in an order he didn't know. "We need a new face, but one that is controlled enough." The voice was so cold it gave Hackman goosebumps. The pent-up anger erupted the next morning. Hackman confronted Friedkin and the producer directly, but the only response he received were weak smiles and defiant looks. That was the first moment Hackman understood. In this game, actors were not artists, but pawns. And the footage he shot wasn't just meant to serve viewers, but was also a tool for behind-the-scenes intrigue. From that moment on, Hackman refused all private meetings with producers and avoided closed parties where secret deals were made under the guise of friendly exchanges. He realized that if he walked through that door, the price he would pay would not only be his career, but also his own soul. Few people knew that Hackman was invited to star in at least 3 hit films from the 1970s, all of which later won Oscars. But he refused all of them because each script sent included a list of non-artistic conditions. Private dinners with influential figures in the industry, undated contracts with vague terms regarding image promotion opportunities, and, worst of all, requests that were never allowed to be written down. Requests that so enraged Hackman that he tore up the script as soon as he finished reading it. There was an internal rumor that Hackman never confirmed, but that had been circulating in the film industry for years. Hackman witnessed a secret arrangement to rig the Oscars. The powerful producer had a quiet exchange with an Academy media representative, not about the quality of the film, but about the package of media guarantees after the award show. From then on, Hackman never believed in Oscar campaigns again. For him, the golden statuette was not a reward for art, but a trophy for shaking hands in the dark. And as the whispers in the studio that year rang out every night, Hackman knew he no longer belonged. Chapter 3, Confession of an Oathbreaker. In the small room on the Santa Fe coast where Gene Hackman had spent his last years to avoid noise, an old telephone rang late at night. On the other end of the line was a familiar voice, his close friend for decades, the only person Hackman still trusted enough to tell him what he had buried since his youth. But this time Hackman didn't call to chat or tell old stories. He called to confess. Hackman's voice was hoarse, each word a cut in the listener's ear. He began with a short, cold sentence, like a night wind blowing through an open window. "We sold our souls for fame. And I can't die with this burden on me." Outside, the New Mexico sky was thick and black, but true darkness filled the room where Hackman sat. No lights, no regular whiskey on the table, just the dirty memories he had tasted for over half a century, now rising like a flood. Hackman spoke slowly, as if each word were a stone tied to his chest. He recalled a night in 1974 at a mansion in Beverly Hills, where not only A-list stars gathered, but also influential figures from the world of production, media, and politics. This was no ordinary party. This was Hackman's first initiation into the inner circle, a group of seasoned actors who had been canonized by Hollywood in the press but held secrets behind the scenes that were never allowed to be told. The inner circle, according to Hackman, was not a secret society with elaborate rituals or blood oaths. It was a secret pact. Those who saw too much knew too much about the dark side of the movie capital. They were like survivors on a wrecked ship, keeping the cause of the disaster a secret but forced to remain silent if they wanted to preserve their lives and careers. And the greatest secret that Hackman carried with him all his life, the one that destroyed his soul every day, was the cover-up of the most heinous crime that Hollywood had ever committed. A child molestation ring that involved famous filmmakers, talented actors, and those who manipulated awards and the media behind the scenes. In 1975, Hackman and several famous faces, Well-known actors who had long since disappeared from the spotlight were invited to a private party. They thought it was just an opportunity to connect with power, but what happened behind that door haunted Hackman for the rest of his life. In a luxurious room behind a red velvet curtain, there was a scene of children who did not yet understand what was happening, used as entertainment tools for those who called themselves tycoons. The laughter, applause, and secret handshakes after each exchange were captured by Hackman's eyes, frozen in his heart like black ice. The next day, Hackman and several other actors, who also did not expect to end up in Earth's hell, were summoned to a locked room. They were given two choices: sign a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for roles, fame, and security, or open their mouths and let their careers and lives crumble to dust. Hackman signed, not for fame, but because he understood that he alone could not fight the gigantic machine fueled by power and money. Behind this was not just a confession, but a bell ringing to open the door to hell, where Hollywood's dirtiest secrets were waiting to be revealed. Chapter 4: The Lost Tapes. The small wooden house in Santa Fe where Gene Hackman spent the last years of his life quickly became the focus of attention after news of his death spread. Not because the locals were too curious or because of the tabloid reporters, but because a group of people, those who had never come into the light, got there first. They did not bring flowers or memorial candles. They needed tapes. These tapes were once legendary in the closed conversations of some veteran actors. Those who knew Hackman always had a habit of recording, not to blackmail or use as a weapon against anyone, but simply to keep living proof in case the truth needs to be revealed one day. Hackman called them lifeline tapes, the only lifeline between him and his conscience. According to an anonymous tipster in the late 1980s, Hackman started this secret habit: phone calls from producers, negotiations about roles, veiled threats against young actors who refused to cooperate, and even conversations between Hollywood moguls that were never recorded in the official minutes were all quietly recorded by Hackman. Each tape was a slice, of what Hackman called the ugliest mosaic of power I had ever seen. These tapes didn't just contain incoherent sounds. They were living proof of a system that had been operating for decades, where prestigious awards weren't necessarily awarded for talent, where faces were suddenly removed from the screen just for daring to say no, and where young faces were forced to learn silence before they knew the alphabet. Hackman once told a friend that if you heard what I heard, you would never watch Oscar night again. And now that Hackman is gone, those tapes are gone too. Santa Fe police, after receiving a request from the family, conducted a thorough search of the entire home. Secret drawers, shelves with hidden compartments, even every floor tile was scanned. No tapes, no boxes of tapes. Completely gone. Hackman's family, especially his cousin who lived next door for the last 10 years of his life, confirmed seeing old boxes of tapes neatly stacked in a used leather suitcase. Hackman never explained them, only instructed that if something happened, they were not to open them but to contact someone, an old friend who had never appeared in any public photos. But when police opened the door to Hackman's warehouse, the suitcase was gone. No trace. No note. Someone took them. But who? The more terrifying question is, did Hackman manage to copy these tapes? And if so, where are they? In the hands of a former colleague who was on the same side? In a mysterious lawyer's safe in New York? Or were they sent straight to the newsroom, where reporters are sitting on a giant time bomb, just waiting for the right moment to explode? Some Hollywood insiders revealed that Hackman was not the only person aware of the tapes. Some directors, screenwriters, and even young actors who had fallen victim to shady dealings also knew, but no one dared to mention it because they understood that just mentioning the missing tapes meant signing their own death warrant. As the lights dimmed on the deserted streets of Santa Fe, only questions hung in the darkness. What bits of truth did Hackman manage to leave behind? And who or what power has the power to decide whether these secrets will ever see the light of day? In this darkness, Hollywood remained silent as if nothing had happened. But those who knew Hackman understood. The tapes were not lost. They were simply hiding, waiting for a hand brave enough to reveal the truth. Chapter 5: The Exile's Curse. From the day he officially left his last film set, Gene Hackman chose a path that few Hollywood icons dared to take. A path of silence, isolation, and complete solitude. Santa Fe, New Mexico, with its dry hills and red sky at sunset, became his last refuge. A modest wooden house with no high gates or walls. No guards. Only the sound of the wind blowing through the cracks. As if every sound here matched the absolute silence that Hackman tried to maintain. But even there, Hollywood never really let him go. You can leave Hollywood, but Hollywood will never leave you alone. A statement that Hackman once made during a private meeting with some old friends in 2005 has become a haunting curse. One of those present recalled that Hackman spoke with a quiet expression, but deep inside there was fear. The fear of someone who saw too much, knew too much, and carried too many secrets that were not allowed to exist. During his early years in New Mexico, Hackman kept in sporadic contact with old friends, colleagues from the same era, those who stood on the same side to protect what they called his artistic conscience. But gradually everything closed down. The telephone no longer rang. Handwritten letters no longer had recipients. And Hackman, in a sense, pushed himself into a state of complete isolation. He once joked with his cousin that if I disappeared one day, no one would know. But it wasn't just a random remark. It was a premonition. This same cousin, after Hackman's death, continued to reveal strange signs for years. Strange cars, often parked far in front of the house. Sometimes driving all night without anyone getting out. Strange calls in the middle of the night. Just the sound of soft breathing and then hanging up. Nameless, unaddressed letters with a few handwritten words. We see you. Hackman never officially admitted to being followed, but his cousin confirmed that he knew. He knew to such an extent that there were always 2 suitcases in the house. One with personal belongings and one with documents that no one had ever seen. Hackman lived like an exile in his own home, always ready to leave everything and disappear if necessary. Why? Because of what he knew and what he retained. Over the past few years, Hackman has declined all invitations to return. No honorary Oscars, no Lifetime Achievement Awards, no participation in any commemorative events, partly because he truly hated the hypocrisy of Hollywood, but mostly because he knew that just by walking out of the safety of his door in Santa Fe, the old-timers wouldn't hesitate to reach out and choke his last breaths. Some said Hackman was paranoid, but those who sat with him in that wooden house, who heard incoherent stories about late-night parties in Beverly Hills, about deals behind closed doors, about young stars who never had a chance to shine, knew Hackman was not delusional. He was the last of the few who lived long enough to tell the story. But no one knew whether the stories left Hackman's mouth in time or whether they followed him to the depths of eternal silence. Chapter 6. The final nail in the coffin. Gene Hackman's final days were not peaceful, like scenes of an aging legend enjoying his twilight years. On the contrary, they were days of suffocating tension, as if every last breath was being choked. Every faint ray of a new day was covered by the darkness of memories that he could not erase. About 3 weeks before Hackman's death, his cousin noticed an unusual change. Hackman, who had long since severed most of his contacts with Hollywood, called constantly. Not for his younger colleagues, not for the reporters who once sought him out, but for a few old faces, those who were part of the secret circle of silence whose agreement Hackman had broken years ago. They used to be allies. Now most of them are gone, not from memory, but from life. And what's more terrifying is that they all died in bizarre circumstances. Car accidents in the middle of the night, slips and falls downstairs in their own homes, and even sudden deaths in luxury mansions in Beverly Hills. Deaths that seemed accidental, but Hackman never believed in accidents in the world of those who sold their souls for glory. I have no one to talk to anymore, Hackman once muttered as he stood by the office window, his hands shaking as he clutched the old landline phone. Calls went unanswered. Voicemails were never returned. Familiar voices were silenced forever. In Hackman's desk drawer after his death, a series of scattered notes were found, written in scribbles, with no beginning or end, like hastily assembled pieces of an incomplete puzzle. There was only one line on a crumpled piece of paper. The same faces, the same hands, the same silence. The phrase was like a disturbing refrain, repeated in other notes, as if Hackman was trying to carve out a message for anyone curious enough to read it and brave enough to understand it. The same faces, The old faces. The ones that smiled next to him on the red carpet, and then the same faces that sank the careers and souls of those who dared to speak out. The same hands. The hands that patted him on the back as he won awards. And the same hands that signed orders to eliminate unnecessary witnesses. The same silence. A silence that lasted for over half a century, protecting the darkest secrets of Hollywood, where power was not measured just by money or fame, but by life and death. Gene Hackman's death, when it was announced, had an official cause, natural causes, a neat, clean finale, with no trace for the curious, but for those who understood the world from which Hackman escaped. Nature never existed. Was this the end or the last warning that Hollywood sent to those who were thinking about breaking the rules? An old friend, one of the few survivors, told the press after Hackman's funeral, Gene knew the rules. He knew them better than anyone, and he knew what happens when you forget who made them. Gene Hackman's story does not end with a quiet grave in Santa Fe. It ends with the office door slamming behind the first policeman entering the wooden house. A silent landline phone by the window and the last piece of paper found under the drawer. I was never supposed to leave alive. Gene Hackman closed his eyes, but his last words continued to echo, not a farewell melody, but a scream that ripped through the shiny mask that Hollywood used to hide his decaying conscience. This secret. Who dared to hear all this? This statement did not come only from a man who was about to leave this world, but from the voice of a tormented conscience. He lived a wonderful life, but full of regret and remorse. He devoted his life to art, but paid for it with wounds and losses. At the last moment, he could no longer remain silent. He had to tell the truth, even if that truth might shake the world. Those left behind, would they dare to face this truth? Would they dare to listen to these words until the end? Would they choose to cover their ears, close their eyes, and continue to live in illusions and lies? Gene Hackman is gone, but his words remain a warning, a challenge, and the answer will perhaps determine the fate of the entire industry.